Guys, today we'll talk about all the changes to Space Marine points cost from the new Munitorum Field Manual update that was released today. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'll try to give you my idea of which units I believe will become much better and you should use more in your list, so stay tuned. Obviously, green means a discount and red means bad, so we've received an uptick in the price. First are the Jump Back Assault Intercessors. They are 80 points now for unit of 5 from 85. That is an incremental change, but I like the Jump Back Assault Intercessors. They were pretty good before as a skirmish unit that is good at going after your opponent's chaff stuff, and now they are even better. Only 15 points away from a unit of scouts now, and obviously they don't get infantry, they don't get going back to reserves. However, they still have the mobility just because they have the 12-inch move, and they can dip strike obviously as their jump backers. Profile makes them pretty reasonable for the price, especially considering the mortal wounds, and if you are someone like a Raven Guard player, you might even consider running a 10-man unit now with Shrike. Next is a Brutalis Dreadnought. This one is very interesting and unusual, and you know me, I love Dreadnoughts, especially anything on the Redemptor platform I would love specifically, and Brutalis is a very cool unit to have in your army, and he is now significantly better, and I expect him to see much more play competitively all around the game. From the Iron Storm lists that are running a bunch of Dreadnoughts to lists with Stormlands and Space Wolves where you get to advance and charge this thing, and I expect him to be in the avant-garde of that charge. If you haven't seen my Brutalis Mortal Wound Machine video before, check it out, because there I describe how much damage you can actually pull out of this platform. You get quite a lot of damage through attacks. You have Sweep, which is something that we're really liking on the Redemptor, and we also get the Mortal Wound output, which is great for this kind of price. My only gripe left with the Brutalis is the fact that they have removed his 10-inch move, which I think 10-inch move is what's separating him from being excellent, and now he's just pretty good, maybe even very good. Next are the Eliminators, 85 points from 75, so 10 points more. I assume that is because some people were using them with the like a shenanigan, putting them in Impulsor and having like a Impulsor Eliminator crazy card running around and shooting people. I guess that's the reason why, and probably the cost is justified. However, I have not personally encountered that being played against me, though 85 points is still manageable. You just won't see them as the role that they were previously. In 9th edition at least, they were often a very good support unit that you could take to sit on your home objective. Now we have scouts, infiltrators, a bunch of other units for that. Eliminators are definitely not at the price point where you would be using them for this. As always, if you're looking for help building your roster or your collection, check out the links to my Patreon in the description, because I provide personal assistance for that there. Hellblasters, a very unusual change, 115 points from 125. So 10 points decrease, and a unit of 10 is now gonna cost you 230 instead of 250. It's quite a drastic change, and now Hellblasters are approaching the price point where I can expect to see them in some lists, because they do have a pretty good gun in general. The problem with them is that their gun is in that sort of weird place where it's a bit too much for killing infantry and not good enough for killing monsters and vehicles. So they either need some buffs, which is exactly what I described in my top 3 strong list for special Space Marine chapters, non-compliant. I recommend to watch that, where they do get a very reasonable buff, which makes them a good unit to counter pretty much any high toughness threat. If they don't have those buffs, you have a problem, which you can try solving that with something like a lieutenant that gives them lethal hits, which that is going to be helpful. However, with the amount of shots, lethal hits are not gonna really change the situation enough so that it really solves the problem. It just helps you a bit. But I think now 5-man units of Hellblasters in the Impulsors, perhaps running around in the Iron Storm detachment with the vehicles, now very well might see that played on the tabletops. And I love Hellblasters as models. I have 15 myself for Deathwatch, and I really am waiting for a moment to use them. Have not figured out the way how to do that for me yet, but I think this change change is helpful. Next, Incursor squad, 80 points from 85. Incursors were in a very interesting spot where you probably want to have either scouts or infiltrators, so you usually didn't have the points to really invest into the small upgrade, incremental upgrade from scouts. And it's not even an upgrade, it's more of a side grade, because you're losing infiltrators, you are losing their ability to go up, down, and give you secondary points potentially somewhere at the end of the game where, oh, you got capture enemy outpost and all of your other stuff is dead, but you have your scouts and you can potentially have removed them in your turn at the end of your opponent's turn, and now they're in reserves, and oh, you can now secure that objective, that opponent's home objective, because that is empty, for example. Where with Incursors you cannot really do that because they only have scouts, so they don't have that mobility. What they do have is their very nifty ability to give +1 to hit to your army, and +1 to hit against a particular unit in your opponent's army is very strong, especially if you combine that with something like Oath. That is going to make a huge difference. That's pretty much why you're paying those points for them. So 80 points, I think it's not going to solve the issue of you either want infiltrators to protect you from dip strikes or scouts because they're cheaper and more mobile, but obviously it's going to make it an easier choice. For example, if you have just enough points to upgrade, 15 points to upgrade from scouts to the Incursors, you already have 1 or 2 maybe scout squads, and you maybe don't want to buy a third one, and you have the points to buy the Incursors. Now it is a wiser choice, especially if you have a lot of shooting where you would really benefit from that +1 to hit. Next is an unusual one. It's a Stormraven gunship. From 240 he went up to 260, still 20-point upgrade. I guess a bunch of people have actually realized what a sleeper unit this is, because I have talked about that extensively on the channel, that I believe that there are ways to make the Stormraven gunship work. I have not personally seen the lists that use that, but I heard about them. I think it was Dark Angel's Ironstorm lists. It makes sense because it's a huge transport which can transport a Dreadnought. It can transport a bunch of infantry. It has -1 damage and a bunch of guns. So why not try using that in the detachments that really support that? And 260 is the same price as the Redeemer now, which is quite expensive, and I think it will put a little bit of a break onto the lists that have been utilized in the Stormraven, which is kind of sad because Stormraven lists are just by definition very cool. Next is a tactical squad, again a 20 points decrease, so they were 80 points for 5, and even though they cannot be run as 5s, they can only split into 5s, and now they cost 140. Perhaps someone realized that in the GW that no one's using the tactical marines. I've talked about how bad they are in my review for all the battle line units. They are really bad because we have such awesome units for battle line, like the assault intercessors, for example, or even the regular Intercessor squad with the sticky objectives, or perhaps for Black Templars, the Primaris Crusader squad. So a lot of great choices, and really the tactical squad has no place anywhere there, and I don't unfortunately think that cost of 70 points per 5 is really going to solve anything for them. Just perhaps if you have a lot of those models and you really want to use them, it will not be such a hit for you points-wise to use them. Even though they are the cheapest vanilla battle line choice we have, even cheaper than the Assault Intercessors, I still don't think it solves their issue of being just mediocre and not doing anything for the army. Because Intercessors have sticky objectives, heavy Intercessors are very tough, the Assault Intercessors can fight really well. What can tactical marines do? Split into 2 squads? That just doesn't really do anything for us. Next is the Terminator Assault Squad. My favorite unit for the Black Templars list. I really like to run them as a 10-man brick with 5+ feel no pain and shields. Now these guys are even cheaper, which is great because the Black Templars have received some points hits, which you will see in the later section of this video. So now for a 10-man unit, we would save 20 points, so that's not bad. And the Assault Squad is, in my opinion, a good, solid unit. They do have a problem with mobility, which you have to solve some way, but we don't have Canticle of Hate, I think it was called in 10th edition, for +2 to charge anymore. So that's the biggest problem. You have to rapid ingress them, you have to play with all these shenanigans to actually make the charge into combat. That's why I like them in the Black Templars, because there you can pretty much just start them on the board and advance them, and then reactive move them d6 when you're shot. That kind of solves the problem of mobility for them because they're so durable that their sole purpose is pretty much gathering all that firepower on them, keeping your other units safe. For other chapters, I'm not sure it's going to work this way, but they are still a very solid unit, and if you run them with a chaplain, it pretty much solves their issue of fighting against higher toughness units because Thunderhammers have that problem. Terminator Squad is now 175 points from 185, so again a decrease for 10 points, and they're now extremely cheap, 35 points per model. So it's just 5 points over a Blade Guard veteran. These guys have 4+ invulnerable save and 2+ save, not just the invulnerable save. If you can get buffs on these guys, and there are a lot of buffs available for Terminators because they do accept them very easily. A lot of detachments work really well with Terminators, from Inner Circle detachment to Gladiators to a bunch of others. Even though I do really dislike the fact that the bolters don't do anything now, you really need to jump through a bunch of hoops to get them working. I have that same problem when I'm playing with my Grey Knights, but I'm kind of used to that from 8th and 9th edition, and I never really counted bolter fire as anything that should be doing damage anyways. But for Terminators, you can expect the squad to do well in shooting, and they are not gonna do well. A couple of heavy guns in the squad aren't really changing that situation, so it's their melee is still the main thing that they're gonna be doing, and they have the same problem with that as the Assault Terminators. How are you gonna deliver them into combat? So it's the biggest limiting factor for the Terminators, in my opinion. If you can solve that issue for your army, then they are more than worth 35 points per model. Another unit that I was not expecting to see get a discount is the Vindicator. We talked extensively on this channel about how good this tank is, and now if you're running anything that needs shooting, which is probably most of the Space Marine list, and you have the Vindicator, it is perfect time to dust it off and put it on the table, because even at 190 points it was before, I really recommended it to a lot of people, especially to the Ironstorm players, because there this tank shines very, very brightly. With other detachment, he's still good at 190, and at 175 he's great in my opinion. Yes, Gladiator Lancer is still 160, so that's 15 points less, but that's not 30 points less. If you don't have a problem with a bit shorter range and you want the versatility of the Demolisher Cannon on the Vindicator, it's a really good choice now to make that swap. Again, what I talked about in my Vindicator video, you should be able to deliver the damage other than with the Vindicator, because you will sometimes run into a problem of lower range or not being able to see the target. That's why if you want to have good shooting, you want, in addition to Vindicator, to have something like Inceptors that can dip strike and touch something that the Vindicator doesn't see, where Gladiator Lancer doesn't have that problem because he can reach out and touch far away. But if you have closed that gap, closed that problem for your list, definitely pick up the Vindicator and put it on the table. 2 enhancements from Ironstorm are now 10 points more expensive. We'll still stand by my words that you need to run all 3 enhancements in every Ironstorm list that you run, because they're just too good. Adept of the Omnissiah, if I remember correctly, is the one that allows you to blank a damage for your vehicles, which is awesome, especially if you're playing against something like a Gladiator Lancer. And guess what? That is what most Space Marine players run nowadays. And Master of the Machine War is the one that allows you to advance and shoot, fall back and shoot, which again, that is perfect. And even at 35 points for the enhancement, to be honest, it was pretty undercosted before, and now it's at the right price. Now the Blood Angels. I personally think that they are one of the stronger Space Marine detachments, and I personally have wanted to use them competitively in the month or so when the units, some of the units that you see now on the screen, will be ready and painted, which you will see eventually on the channel in the battle reports. Interesting units have received discounts. Chief Librarian Mephiston, he was pretty decent before, and he gives the squad fight first, which is a great ability to have. The only problem with Mephiston is the fact that he doesn't really lead units that you want him to lead. You want him to give fight first to something like a Terminator Squad, where he can only pretty much join Tacticus armor, so something like Assault Intercessors, which obviously for them it is not as important. You want something that buffs their output more than the fight first. still very good in combat himself. 6 attacks at 9 minus 3 d3 damage from the Vitarius is impressive. So if you have the model and if you want to run Assault Intercessors from, for example, a Land Raider in the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, he might be a good choice, and obviously getting a 10 points discount is not bad. Death Company Dreadnought is a very unusual change, and I really love the fact that they have decreased it in price by 20 points, because this thing is really dangerous. It is essentially a small Dreadnought with toughness 9 and 2+ save as we're used to, but it has 6+ feel no pain. In addition to that, he obviously has the Black Rage rule, so he rerolls all hit rolls. However, he does have objective control 0 if he's not within 12 inches of a chaplain, and he cannot fall back as well, which I don't think you'll be falling back with this thing, to be honest. The thing I really like about the Death Company Dreadnought is the Magna Grapple rule that you have, which allows you to get +2 to the charge roll if you're charging a monster or a vehicle, and it can be one of the units that you charge. So if there's an infantry unit that you want to charge beside a tank, you might want to declare both. Obviously you will need to roll high enough to reach both in the engagement range, but it still will give you that buff. Charging for 7 from reserves is no joke, considering especially that there are a lot of vehicles and monsters running in the game, and most likely you will want to charge a monster vehicle with this Dreadnought. So for 445 points, I'm really now considering making changes to my Blood Angels list to try and include these guys. And it's not even the end of his rules. He has a bunch of damage 3 attacks from either his fists or talons, which talons are lower strength, lower AP, but 2 more attacks. Fists are much higher strength, but there are 2 less attacks. Really need to math hammer that, because I'm not sure what is better, +2 attacks at strength 8 or -2 attacks at strength 12 and extra AP. Probably against most targets you will want the Furioso Fists, but we'll talk about that if we talk about this guy on the channel again. The biggest thing I like about him is the Frenzied Reprisal, which is essentially him fighting again if he is targeted in the combat. Not sure if I remember any changes from the FAQs, correct me if I'm wrong, but how rules are written now, it's essentially if whenever he's targeted by an attack, he can fight or shoot whenever. So however many times he gets attacked, he will fight back. Pretty sure there was a change to this rule, so I think you can only do that once. But in any case, even if you can do it once, it's still a very, very strong rule. So all in all, I really like the Death Company Dread, and at 145 points, that's a very, very good price point for such a small beast. Like your own tactical nuke against opponents' vehicles and monsters. Death Company Marines have received the points hike. This is the Death Company's firstborn, essentially, so they're now 10 points more expensive, and they were pretty reasonable before because they get sustain hits 1 whenever they're fighting below starting strength, and sustain hits 2 if they're below half strength, so they really get crazy when they are going down. They're very dangerous from a Land Raider, so I understand why their points were increased. They should be a bit more expensive, and they are still very good. With +1 to wound from a chaplain, with sustained hits potentially from being wounded, full rerolls to hit, and a bunch of power fist attacks, they really can do damage. Same goes for their jump pack associates, which is the Death Company Marines with jump packs, 140 points now from 130. Again, 10 points increase is not going to change the situation for them. As for the normal without the jump packs guys, I think they are still in an excellent spot. You still want to use them in Blood Angels list because you really don't have an alternative, even though, as you'll see later, the Sanguinary Guard have received a points decrease. I still really love the combination of them plus Lemardis, which Lemardis also got a 10 points increase. I think even though now you're going to pay essentially a 30 points upcharge for running this unit, I still think they're more than worth it, because if you run them as Sons of Sanguinius, they are hitting like a freight train, and if you're running them as Gladius, they're hitting like a freight train, and they're very fast. And at -1 damage and 6+ feel no pain, they are really not easy to get rid off, and it's very hard to get rid of them in shooting because you need a very specific profile to be really efficient against them, and you will be positioning them in such a way after the fight, hopefully, that they will be hard to target. And if someone charges them, you use only in death does duty end and then fight on death, and it becomes a very inefficient situation for your opponent. What about the Sanguinary Guard? They are still, in my opinion, a bit too expensive. 155 points is significantly better than the 175 375 they did cost before, so that's 310 for a unit of 10. They are a very interesting data sheet with -1 to hit from melee attacks and -1 to wound from melee attacks. My problem with them is that there are other attacks that exist in this game which are shooting attacks. So if someone shoots this unit, they will die just as easily as any firstborn marine with 2+ save. And unlike the Death Company, which get -1 damage from the Marties and they get 6+ feel no pain, these guys only have 2+ save. And yes, 2+ in cover plus Armor of Contempt is good, but I think that they're just not quite there yet. Though if you really want to run them now, you will not be taking such a huge points hit on your roster's efficiency as you did before, significantly less. That's 40 points extra. That's almost like a scout squad for free if you have been running these as a 10-man. Next is a Sanguinary Priest, 90 points from 80. I understand why they've increased his price, because he gives his squad 5+ feel no pain and extra AP in combat, which those two things are extremely good for a bunch of units such as the Intercessors, Assault Intercessors. Not gonna really change the situation for him either. I think he's still worth the points, though now it's even harder for you to fit them in the lists. Same for the Sanguinary Priest with a jump pack. Again, doesn't really change the situation. I think they're still good if you're gonna be running them with correct units, such as Assault Intercessors for the Sanguinary Priest and Assault Intercessors with jump packs for the Sanguinary Priest with a jump pack, and they really become a deadly unit with extra AP that they get there. And 5+ feel no pain really makes them survivable. So even though you're paying almost the price of another squad for just having that character in the unit, it's still worth it in my opinion. Next are the Dark Angels. All of the units have received discounts. I really like the fact that the Deathwing Knights are now 20 points cheaper, because with AP1 they have on their weapons, they're really not good in combat. And even though they, yes, are Terminators with -1 damage and 4 wounds, which is a great combination, don't get me wrong, they needed the points decrease, and now I think they're at least somewhere close to being manageable. Dark Angels still suffer from the fact that their book is very bad in terms of the data sheets, in terms of some parts of the data sheets, don't get me wrong. The Deathwing Knights data sheet is great other than the melee. Now it's easier to justify including the Deathwing Knights into the fold. Deathwing Terminator Squad is now 180 from 190, so 360 points for a 10-man, so just 10 points more than the regular Terminators, which is understandable considering they get more options as a unit. They get a lot of cool buffs from the Inner Circle detachment, so I really like the fact that they're cheaper now, and running a huge army of Terminators is going to be an easier thing to pull off with enough support units now than it was before. Inner Circle Companions, 90 points from 105, so they're now exactly the same cost as Blade Guard Veterans, sorry, and I really like that, because there was no reason in the world why they needed to be more expensive than the Blade Guard, which are, some would say, better than the Inner Circle Companions. They still will struggle to really outmatch the Blade Guard Veterans, because those have 4+ inbuilt, those have damage 2 and AP2 on their swords, where these guys, their biggest issue is still AP1 on their swords. And it can still only be salvaged by extra AP1 you get from Honor the Chapter in the Gladius, so you cannot even run the Dark Angels detachment and make the Inner Circle Companions good. So they really need that extra AP. I hope it will be changed somewhere in the future, perhaps in the balanced data slate we'll see in the summer. For now, they are okay. I just still have a problem with their output. Lion has received a huge discount of 50 points, which is very understandable because he was extremely overcosted because of what they have done with his data sheet. He lost -1 to wound, he lost damage on his sweep, which I still don't understand why they've done that, because Lion was good, but he was not that good in my opinion. Now he is probably usable, you can include him in the list. He still has damage 4 sword, so he will do quite a lot of damage to some targets, and he can still wipe 1 wound units reasonably well. So if you really like the model, as I like him as well, you can think about including this 300 monstrosity into the list. However, the fact that he's a monster, talking about monstrosities, he's a monster, so he will struggle still with terrain, and that's why I think if you want to run really competitive Dark Angels, you still will not include him. Next up, Black Templar is my favorite guy, so they have received some bad news. Their tanks now have to pay the full price for the Melta, so 5 points more for each tank. I don't think it's gonna change anything about their lists. It's just a small annoying tax you have to pay now as a Black Templar. So Lancer is 170 now, Valiant 160, and Reaper is 160. Impulsor is now 90 points. There's a mistake typo here in the slide, so don't just ignore that. Impulsor is 90 from 95. It's annoying, but to be honest, the Impulsor Gladius list from the Black Templars is still extremely strong. You just get so much mobility, you get so much hitting power with those Sword Brethren units inside Impulsors, so paying extra 15 points is again not going to change this math. All the changes here are so incremental that essentially, yes, for a very tuned list it will feel like a big hit, but I assure you it's not gonna really change the way you play the game or your win rate. Consider also that some of your opponents, like Necrons for example, have received some really dramatic increases in the prices, so this will help you a lot. So these 5 points changes for Impulsors are not gonna make it really worse. Crusader Squad is now 85 from 75. They were extremely efficient as a unit, and I understand why GW have changed that. They probably have seen a couple of tournament lists that ran too many Crusader units, and I understand that. And now I think that Crusader Squad is probably less efficient than running, for example, Assault Intercessors for the same role. Primary Sword Brethren are 150 now from 140, so that's 300 points for 10 instead of 280. I fully understand why they did it, because there was no reason in the world why the Sword Brethren should be less expensive than Blade Guard. Even though the Blade Guard have 4+ invulnerable save, which is nice, don't get me wrong, but the fact that the Sword Brethren hit so much harder and their unit size is so much better than the Blade Guard really makes this, I think, a fair increase. Still want to run them, nothing really changes. You still want to run them as well as you want to run the Terminator Assault unit. Perhaps now you could think about maybe running Primaris Crusader Squad and a Terminator Assault unit instead of the Sword Brethren, but that's just an option. You don't have to do it, and your list will still function very well. Now the Space Wolves, only 2 changes here. Wolf Guard Terminators are cheaper just because all Terminators are getting cheaper now, and Wolf Scouts 75 from 85, closer to their normal scout brethren. I think Space Wolves are in a very good spot now in terms of their names in the tournament rankings, because the Space Wolves detachment is still very bad, and they still have great data sheets which are just much better in the Stormlands and Gladius. And running a bunch of Thunderwolf cavalry with a bunch of Wolfen and Fenrisian Wolves is still the way. You will probably supplement that now with Brutalis Dreadnought, and it's still extremely efficient and will make it a very hard day for any opponent out there. Those Space Wolves players, rejoice, you have a very good situation now with your units. Yes, you have a problem with how your detachment functions, but that is not changing the fact that you can still play your army, play your models, and it will be fun. Lastly, my favorite Grey Knights. So they have received some not great changes to the points. So their infantry, all of them are now 1 point per model cheaper. So 120 points for the strike squad from 125. This is not going to offset the fact that the librarian is now 10 points more expensive. So that's an extra 30 points you're paying for just running 3 librarians. And you still want to run 3 librarians because we don't have any good ranged output otherwise, except for the Nemesis Dreadnought, which, oh no, it also is now 10 points more expensive. Those lists that ran 6 Dreadnoughts have probably been noticed by GW, and they wanted to put a stop to that. Not a stop, but just break it slightly. I still think Nemesis Dreadnought is an interesting unit, and I still think it has problems. Main problem for me for Nemesis Dreadnought is the fact that you cannot hide this thing well enough on most terrains because of the huge base, the huge pretty much size of the model and the height, and it kind of breaks the tempo that Grey Knights really want to play at. Hiding is again very important for Grey Knights, which is difficult to do with Dreadnoughts. Dreadnoughts are still in great position in my opinion. The Brotherhood Terminator now is 10 points more expensive, which is understandable because some people were just using this thing as a very cheap way to get deployed teleport homers and behind enemy lines, and I like the fact that GW is sort of not stopping but controlling the way that people sometimes want to play fixed secondaries. So let me know what you think about the new changes, how you're gonna change your list, which units you now will run that you didn't run previously. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.